The Second World War, spanning from 1939 to 1945, reshaped the global political landscape and societal structures, laying the groundwork for the international order of the 20th century. Preceding the war, the world was gripped by the Great Depression, resulting in economic hardship, widespread unemployment, and severe inflation that devalued currencies across more than 50 nations. This war did not just affect the battling countries, it affected the civilians in surrounding countries as well. As the war grew to new heights, the war tactics grew as well. This outbreak led to environments, ideologies, and even civilians being a result of warfare. The Guernsey Islands happened to become a result as well, leaving them to deal with the repercussions for over half a decade. The primary source chose for our project was the newspaper The Star. From World War II, based out of the Guernsey Islands, Guernsey was the only British territory that was occupied by the Nazi regime. On June 28, 1940, German bombs poured from the sky down onto the Guernsey harbor. After this event, the British Prime Minister decided to abandon the island because it could only harm them. This led to the Nazis taking control of the island for the next 5 years. The Guernsey newspaper, written by author Frank Fala, The Star, was read by many inhabitants of the Guernsey Island. The newspaper used for our project were printed during the summer of World War II in 1942. While reading The Star, we learned about the political policies, economic processes, and social institutions. These different documents allowed us to understand what it was like living in Guernsey during this time of warfare. During this time, newspapers were one of the main sources of propaganda. Propaganda is spreading of misleading information in an effort to promote particular ideology and/or political view. While examining the newspaper, it was very apparent that the use of propaganda was specifically throughout each news piece and placed in each reading carefully. During World War II, propaganda was widely used by all parties, but in particular, it was used by the Nazis and British. The Nazi psychological scheme and strategy were the munitions that spread their ideologies to the public while also degrading their enemy. Nazis would use propaganda as a means of showing their progress throughout the war. The Star newspaper reported that German raids had happened and their progress and losses that the British were facing. Nazi propaganda tried to influence citizens of Nazi territories, including Guernsey, into following their regime, as well as using their ideology and use of propaganda as a way to justify their actions that were being taken as acceptable and reasonable, as well as showing their strength and power to the public. Newspapers like The Star became the eye of public interest, advertising, and propaganda. While flipping through the pages, it was evident in uncovering the hidden messages woven into every page, urging support for the war and announcing victories that rallied the German-occupied islands. Across the English Channel, the British propaganda held its own against the relentless enemy. Fueled by a relentless spirit, it fired rumors and stories that resonated with the public. While searching through our primary source, propaganda was revealed throughout different articles, stubs, and sections. The first propaganda piece was illuminated through the use of superiority, manipulation, and lies. Saturday, August 15th, 1942, in the section Another Raid on Norwich, it states, within the last 3 days, German fighters have shot down 261 Soviet planes over the Eastern Front, as compared with a loss by Germans of 22 machines. These further losses of the Soviet Air Force provided additional proof of the superiority of German airmen and their machines. This demonstrates that propaganda due to the writers implying that the Germans were superior to the Soviet Union. The author is trying to trick the citizens of Guernsey that the Germans are doing a good thing. He puts in false statements trying to convince the citizens to follow along with the Nazi regime. On the contrary, the Germans reported that their raid in Norwich as a success and reported that Germans were superior. It was reported by the New York Times that Britain came out as a superior. Both sides reported that the raid in Norwich was a success on their end. It was reported by the Germans in the Star that the Germans' planes were able to turn back around British aircraft that were trying to approach the Belgium coast. However, in the New York Times, they reported that the RAF shot down German planes that were attempting to chase them off. Furthermore, in the Star, there were no reported civilian casualties as a result of the raid, but according to the New York Times, they reported 5 civilian casualties and others injured. The Star did not report heavy losses in the raid, however, did not specifically state the exact numbers of losses suffered. The Times reported losses of the Axis powers, which included Germany in the month of July overall. They reported that 424 Axis power planes were destroyed and that the Axis powers suffered 55 losses compared to 0 losses for the RAF. In these reports, we see the principle of self-censorship taking place, the active control of which is being reported versus which is not. The Star, which is a German newspaper for the Nazis, reports only what they want to report on what makes the Nazi regime look good and seem superior, while the New York Times report only what they want to report and report on what makes the United States and Britain look good overall. All of this is the tactic of propaganda used by the Germans, the United States, and British. Each side used propaganda. Each side, more in particular, the Nazis in Britain, used propaganda as their ammunition to spread their ideologies to the public while also degrading their enemies. The next piece of propaganda for our primary source was subtitled False News. Written by the Guernsey Nazis, the newspaper states that the New York correspondent of the Times writes that not only the British, but also the Americans are victims of policies of false news adopted by their governments. The correspondents also add that the American minister who are responsible for the diffusion of news have wrongly judged the morale of the nation. The Americans and British, according to the Star, would have been better off deferring unfavorable announcements. This is an excellent way of visibly seeing the way propaganda was used in the Nazis' favor. By sharing false governmental information of other countries, that led to a narrative that Guernsey Islanders to believe that they were prospering above other governmental agencies and boosting their ego. Discovering the select few who portrayed bravery and defied the occupiers were the ones documenting their struggles and keeping the spirit of the resistance alive through private diaries. Their stories, like the Star, stand as a testament to the indomitable human spirit. Nazi propaganda was a formidable force, reshaping society and molding citizens' thoughts. The Star article portrays Nazis' actions in a positive light. Propaganda, both a weapon and a shield, played a pivotal role in World War II. It shaped societies, influenced minds, and determined the outcomes of battles. As we look back at history, we must remain vigilant, recognizing the immense power of propaganda and the need to preserve the truth, freedom, and the indomitable human spirit. After the complete takeover of the Guernsey Island, many of the island locals were completely shocked about the invasion. In the beginning of the Nazi occupation, resistance was little to none because of the many goods and services still available, like the commodities of luxury goods, like high-quality purses, high-quality clothes, and vehicles still being available to purchase. Things started to change rapidly months after the invasion. Once already existing supplies started to dwindle, and the population had to rely more and more on the Nazi occupiers for basic goods. This is where the sparks of resistance started. Compared to occupied France at the time, their resistance force was larger and had a more direct sabotage and overall resistance. The approach of the Guernsey people took was a more passive and indirect approach that over time started to tax the Nazi regime. The Nazis would start to punish whole neighborhoods and started to put whole areas on the island on a curfew because of the population's hostile relations with the new government and laws. Later on, in the occupation of the Guernsey Islands, the local newspaper, The Star, and editor Bill Taylor, up until his removal, kept putting relevant news about the outside world and trustworthy information about the war raging on in Europe. This helped keep the island people informed and aware of the hypocrisies of the Nazis. After his removal, people started to join in a more personal resistance, like avoiding being near Nazi soldiers or painting V's on the signs about an Allied victory over the Nazi regime. Even though the people of Guernsey's resistance was limited compared to other efforts at the time, it still played a pivotal role in distracting the regime by having to use resources and manpower to help control the flow of information in the favor of ideals and values of Nazis. The newspaper The Star contains elements of propaganda and warfare tactics in order to reach the people on the island of Guernsey about World War II. Germany uses these tactics in order to form a certain presentation of war to others who may not be familiar with what is happening in Nazi Germany. This island, being rich and a beautiful place to love, was soon changed tremendously by the war. The bombing of the island did not only change the appearance of the island of Guernsey, but it changed the people and the richness of history that came with it. The juxtaposition of the Nazi Germans and its effects on the islands of Guernsey was immense, and it changed history. This created another chapter of devastation that Germany brought to people of World War II. Germany during this time tried to bring order to the world of labor and workers. This was extremely inhumane overall, and this affected people negatively. The book and articles referred to all tie back to the primary source, the newspaper The Star. In the newspaper, the Nazi regime used psychological tactics through the media to reach all peoples on the island. The newspaper informed the people of the island of Nazi occupation in their island and how it was positively affecting the war. The principle of self-censorship was highly involved by not just the Nazis but the British in efforts to promote their ideology and control what was being reported by both sides to influence the public. The Nazis shared their victories with the people that they were invading, and these tactics affected the people in many ways.